Marcus Chen stood frozen at his own promotion party, champagne glass trembling in his hand, as his wife Rachel's laughter cut through the corporate celebration like a blade, her arm wrapped possessively around his boss, Vincent Hastings, while she announced their affair and her intention to divorce Marcus, right there in front of 200 colleagues who'd gathered to celebrate his elevation to senior vice president. The timing couldn't have been more deliberate, more cruel, as Rachel's eyes glittered with triumph while Vincent smirked beside her, both unaware that Marcus had inherited his late parents' $700 million company, the very parent corporation that owned the firm where all three of them worked, the empire his father had built in secret to protect Marcus from fortune hunters, the inheritance that made Vincent his employee and Rachel's entire calculated betrayal absolutely worthless. But what would Marcus do now that his wife and his boss had humiliated him at the pinnacle of his career, not knowing they just destroyed their futures in front of the one man who now controlled everything they'd ever wanted? Would he reveal the truth immediately and watch them crumble, or would he play a longer, more devastating game? And what secrets about Rachel and Vincent's relationship was Marcus about to uncover that would make this betrayal even darker than it appeared? The crystal chandeliers of the Hastings and Associates executive floor cast elegant shadows across the celebration, but Marcus barely noticed the expensive decorations as Rachel's voice rang out over the string quartet that suddenly fell silent. He'd spent the last 3 hours shaking hands, accepting congratulations, believing that his 7 years of 80-hour weeks had finally paid off, that his marriage of 5 years was solid despite the recent distance, that life was finally aligning the way he'd always hoped. The promotion to senior vice president had been unexpected. Marcus was only 32, the youngest person ever elevated to the executive team at Hastings and Associates, the commercial real estate development firm his boss Vincent had always claimed to own outright. "Everyone, can I have your attention, please?" Rachel's voice carried that particular brightness Marcus had learned to recognize over their years together. The tone she used when she wanted an audience, when she was about to make a scene. She stood on the small stage where the CEO usually gave quarterly addresses. Her red dress, the one Marcus had bought her for their anniversary last month, gleaming under the spotlights. Vincent stood beside her, his hand on the small of her back, in a gesture that was far too familiar, far too possessive. Marcus's colleague Jennifer grabbed his arm. "Marcus, what's happening?" But he couldn't answer, couldn't move, as Rachel's next words detonated his entire world. "I'm leaving, Marcus," Rachel announced, her laughter bright and cruel. "I'm divorcing him. Tonight. Right now. Because I'm in love with Vincent and we're getting married." She turned to Vincent with adoration. Marcus had never seen directed at him. He's everything Marcus could never be: powerful, wealthy, successful. Marcus is just a worker bee who got lucky with this promotion. But Vincent owns this company. Vincent has real money, real power. The room erupted in shocked murmurs, but Vincent raised his hand for silence, his trademark confident smile spreading across his face. "It's true," he said, his voice carrying the authority Marcus had always envied. "Rachel and I have been together for 8 months. We tried to wait until after Marcus's promotion party, didn't want to spoil his big moment too soon, but we just can't hide our love anymore." His eyes found Marcus in the crowd, and there was something triumphant there, something that suggested this had always been about more than just Rachel. "No hard feelings, Chen. You're a great employee. This doesn't have to affect your career here." Marcus felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on him, saw pity and shock and barely concealed schadenfreude on the faces of colleagues and competitors alike. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It had been buzzing all evening, actually, but he'd ignored it during the celebration. His lawyer, probably, trying to reach him about the final transfer of his parents' estate. Thomas and Margaret Chen had died in a car accident 4 months ago, and their will had been shockingly complex, full of trusts and corporate structures. Marcus was still trying to understand. What Rachel and Vincent didn't know, what nobody in this room knew except Marcus and his parents' lawyer, was that Thomas Chen hadn't been just a quiet accountant who lived modestly in a suburban home. He'd been Thomas Chen, founder and majority shareholder of Chen Global Holdings, a private equity firm that owned controlling interests in 17 companies across 4 countries, including a little commercial real estate development firm Thomas had acquired 15 years ago called Hastings and Associates. Vincent didn't own Hastings and Associates. Vincent was the CEO, yes, the public face of the company, but he owned exactly 12% of the company stock shares Thomas Chen had allowed him to purchase to keep him motivated. The other 88% had been held in trust by Thomas Chen, and as of this morning, when Marcus had signed the final inheritance papers, that 88% belonged to Marcus. Vincent Hastings wasn't Marcus's boss anymore. Vincent Hastings was Marcus's employee, and Vincent Hastings had just committed several violations of the company's ethics policy, not to mention destroyed any credibility he had with the board of directors that Marcus would be meeting with next week. Rachel was still talking, her voice giddy with victory. "I know this must be hard for you to hear, Marcus, but I haven't loved you in years. You're boring. Predictable. Vincent showed me what life could really be like. The penthouse apartment, the private jets, the real estate portfolio. You could never give me that on your little VP salary. The penthouse apartment Vincent leased from a Chen Global Holdings subsidiary. The private jets Vincent chartered from a Chen Global Holdings aviation company. The real estate portfolio Vincent had built using loans from a Chen Global Holdings bank. All of it, every luxury Rachel was so excited about, ultimately came from the empire Marcus's father had built. Marcus had met Rachel in graduate school, back when he was just another struggling MBA student and she was getting her marketing degree. She'd seemed different then, ambitious but grounded, driven but kind. They'd built a life together through late-night study sessions and ramen dinners, through his first job's brutal hours and her career struggles. When had it changed? When had she become someone who measured love in penthouse apartments? And private jets? His phone buzzed again. Marcus pulled it out, saw 17 missed calls from his lawyer, saw the email marked urgent that had come through 2 hours ago. The subject line read, "Critical. Vincent Hastings undisclosed litigation board action required." Marcus opened the email, his eyes scanning quickly, even as Rachel continued her public humiliation, even as the crowd began to fragment into gossiping clusters, even as his entire carefully constructed life collapsed around him. The email detailed a lawsuit filed against Vincent 3 days ago, a sexual harassment claim from a former employee, multiple other women preparing to come forward, is a pattern of behavior the company's insurance wouldn't cover, because Vincent had lied on disclosure forms. The board needed to meet immediately. The company faced potential liability in the tens of millions, and Rachel wanted to marry this man. Rachel was leaving Marcus for this man. Rachel thought Vincent Hastings was her ticket to the luxury life she'd always craved. Jennifer was still beside him, her grip on his arm tightening. "Marcus, say something. Do something. Don't just stand there." But Marcus wasn't just standing there. Marcus was calculating. His father had been a quiet man, methodical, someone who believed in careful planning and perfect timing. Never reveal your hand until you know every card in play. Thomas had told Marcus countless times, power isn't in the title or the announcement. Power is in what you know and when you choose to act on it. Marcus knew that Vincent was about to be fired, that the board meeting next week would be his first act as majority owner, removing a CEO who'd become a liability. He knew that Vincent's assets were leveraged to the breaking point, that the man lived on credit and appearance, that without his CEO salary and the company's protection, Vincent would be buried in debt within months. He knew that Rachel had bet everything on a man who was already falling. She just couldn't see it yet. The question was, should he tell them now, or should he let them discover it themselves? Marcus looked at Rachel, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in months. She was smiling at Vincent with absolute certainty, with the confidence of someone who believed she'd traded up, who thought she'd escaped a mediocre life for something extraordinary. There was no guilt in her eyes, no sadness about ending their marriage, just triumph and greed and a coldness Marcus had never seen before. "Marcus?" Vincent called out, his voice carrying that false sympathy that made Marcus's jaw clench. "You understand, don't you? These things happen. We can all be adults about this. 200 people waited for Marcus's response. Phones out, already posting to social media, already spreading the gossip that would define him, the cuckolded husband, the man whose wife left him at his own promotion party, the pathetic executive who'd been betrayed by his boss. This moment would follow him forever if he didn't handle it exactly right. Marcus smiled slowly, the expression his father used to wear when closing a difficult deal. "I understand perfectly," he said quietly, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Congratulations, Rachel. Vincent, I hope you'll be very happy together." The crowd murmured in surprise at his composure. But Marcus wasn't finished. He walked toward the exit, then paused and turned back. "Vincent, I'll see you at the board meeting next Tuesday, 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late." His eyes met Vincent's, held them. "We have a lot to discuss about the company's future." Something flickered across Vincent's face, confusion. Maybe a hint of unease, but then his confident smile returned. "Of course, Marcus. Looking forward to working with you in your new role." Marcus left the party, left his cheating wife and corrupt boss celebrating their victory, left behind the career and life he'd built. He walked out into the cool evening air, pulled out his phone, and called his lawyer. "Robert, it's Marcus Chen. I'm ready to move forward with everything. File the papers tonight. I want the board meeting moved to Friday instead of Tuesday. I want this handled before the weekend. And Robert, make sure every member of the board knows exactly who I am and what I own before we walk into that room. Consider it done, Marcus. And Marcus, I'm sorry about tonight. Your father always worried Rachel might be." "My father knew?" Marcus stopped walking, his hand gripping the phone. "He suspected. He never said anything because he wanted you to see it yourself when you were ready. That's why he structured your inheritance the way he did. He wanted you to have power when you finally needed it." Marcus looked back at the glowing windows of the executive floor, at the party continuing without him, at Rachel and Vincent probably toasting to their future right now. His father had known. His father had built him an empire not just as an inheritance, but as armor, as a weapon to use when life inevitably demanded it. "Thank you, Robert. I'll be ready for Friday." Marcus walked to his car, the modest sedan Rachel had always complained about, and drove to the home he'd shared with his wife, knowing she wouldn't be returning tonight. He had 3 days to prepare for the most important meeting of his life, 3 days before Rachel and Vincent discovered that their victory party had actually been a funeral for everything they'd ever wanted. And Marcus Chen, the quiet, boring, predictable vice president nobody had ever taken seriously, was about to show them exactly what real power looked like. Friday morning arrived with unseasonable rain, the kind of storm that turned downtown Seattle into a maze of umbrellas and gray skies. Marcus stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie, not the modest ones he usually wore, but the Hermes tie his father had given him on his 30th birthday, the one he'd saved for special occasions that never seemed to come. Today was that special occasion. His phone showed messages from Rachel's lawyer already, divorce papers filed with remarkable speed, demanding 50% of all marital assets, citing her contributions to his career success. She had no idea what assets actually existed, still thought Marcus was just a VP with a decent salary and a small inheritance from his accountant parents. The shock would come soon enough. Marcus arrived at the Hastings & Associates headquarters at 8:30, deliberately early. The building was a gleaming tower in the heart of the business district, 40 stories of glass and steel that represented everything Vincent wanted people to believe about his success. Security waved Marcus through with sympathetic looks. The story of his wife's betrayal had spread through the company like wildfire, had made the business blogs, had turned him into a figure of pity across the entire industry. The boardroom was on the 40th floor, a space Marcus had only visited twice in his 7 years with the company. Expansive windows overlooked the city, and a massive table of polished mahogany dominated the room. Usually, board meetings included 12 directors, 6 internal executives, including Vincent, and 6 external board members representing various investment interests. Today's meeting had 15 attendees, Marcus's lawyer Robert had insisted on 3 additional participants: the company's chief counsel, an independent HR investigator, and a representative from Chen Global Holdings' corporate governance team. Vincent arrived at 8:50, his usual confident stride only slightly diminished, probably from the long night of celebration with Rachel. He wore a Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, his silver hair perfectly styled, every inch the successful CEO. He nodded to the board members already assembled, then noticed the unfamiliar faces. "Who are they?" Vincent asked, gesturing to the 3 additions. "Additional stakeholders," said Margaret Rothstein, the board's chair and one of the external directors. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. Robert had done his job. The board knew exactly what was coming. "Stakeholders?" Vincent's eyes narrowed. "I don't recall authorizing." "You don't authorize board meetings, Vincent," Margaret interrupted gently. "You attend them." Marcus watched Vincent's face carefully, saw the first flicker of real concern cross those confident features. Vincent's eyes found Marcus, who stood near the windows, apart from the cluster of board members. "Chen, what's going on here? If this is about Tuesday night, I understand you're upset, but this isn't the place for personal." "Sit down, Vincent." Marcus's voice was quiet but carried an authority he'd never used before, an echo of his father's tone. In May, countless business negotiations Marcus had witnessed growing up. Vincent blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said sit down." Marcus walked to the head of the table, to the chair where Vincent usually sat. "We have a lot to cover this morning, and I don't want to waste time." The room fell silent. Board members exchanged glances. Vincent's face flushed red. "Marcus, I don't know what you think you're doing, but Margaret Rothstein cleared her throat. "Vincent, please sit down. Mr. Chen is correct. We have significant matters to address." Vincent looked around the table, saw something in the faces of the board members that made his confident posture finally crack. He sat, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. "Someone want to tell me what's happening?" Robert stood, distributing folders to each board member. "For the record, I'm Robert Chen, senior partner at Chen, Martinez and Associates, representing Marcus Chen and the Chen Global Holdings corporate family. What you'll find in these folders are the current ownership documents for Hastings and Associates, updated as of November 1st to reflect the transfer of controlling interest from the Thomas Chen Trust to Marcus Chen personally." Vincent grabbed his folder, his hands shaking slightly as he opened it. Marcus watched as Vincent's eyes scanned the documents. Saw the exact moment understanding hit Vincent's face went pale, his confident smile vanishing completely. "This is a mistake," Vincent said, his voice hoarse. "Thomas Chen was just an investor. One of several. Thomas Chen owned 88% of this company," Robert interrupted. "You own 12%, Vincent. The remaining shares are split between employee stock options and retirement accounts. Thomas Chen founded this company 30 years ago as Hastings Development Group, brought you on as CEO 15 years ago, and allowed you to purchase minority shares to incentivize your performance. He kept the majority ownership private to avoid attention, to protect his son from exactly the kind of fortune-hunting behavior that motivated your affair with Marcus's wife." The boardroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Vincent's eyes shot to Marcus, and there was something desperate there now, something that looked almost like fear. "You knew?" Vincent's voice was barely a whisper. "Tuesday night? You knew?" "I signed the final inheritance papers Tuesday morning," Marcus said calmly. "By the time Rachel announced your affair at my promotion party, I'd been the majority owner of this company for approximately 9 hours." Vincent's face went through several expressions: shock, disbelief, calculation, and finally a kind of sick realization. "The promotion. Your promotion to senior vice president. That was a test," Marcus finished. "My father's will required that I work at one of his companies for 5 years in a non-ownership capacity, prove myself on merit alone, before I could inherit. The promotion wasn't Vincent, Hastings being generous. The promotion was the executive committee following the succession plan my father established years ago, moving me into position to eventually take over operations. Margaret Rothstein spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. For clarity, the board has known about the Chen family ownership for years. We've been bound by confidentiality agreements. Thomas wanted Marcus to build a career based on his own abilities, without the complications that come with being known as the owner's son. The plan was always for Marcus to gradually take on more responsibility, then transition into a leadership role by age 35. What happened Tuesday night accelerated that timeline. Vincent's hands were shaking now. So what? You're firing me? Over a personal relationship? That's not grounds. I'm not firing you over your relationship with Rachel, Marcus said quietly. He nodded to the corporate counsel, who stood and distributed another set of folders. I'm firing you for cause, effective immediately, based on multiple violations of company policy, breaches of fiduciary duty, and criminal exposure you've created for this organization. The corporate counsel, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Yao, began her presentation. Mr. Hastings, these documents detail 8 separate complaints filed against you over the past 6 years by female employees. All were settled using company funds without board approval. You misrepresented these settlements as consulting fees and professional development expenses on company financial statements. Additionally, 3 days ago, a former executive assistant filed a lawsuit alleging sexual harassment, hostile work environment, and retaliation. Her lawyers have evidence suggesting similar behavior toward at least 6 other women. Vincent's face had gone from pale to gray. Those settlements were nothing. Minor complaints blown out of proportion. They took the money happily enough. You paid them with company money without authorization. Margaret Rothstein interrupted, her voice hard now. You exposed this organization to massive legal liability. And according to the independent investigation we commissioned this week, you deliberately lied on disclosure forms, which means our insurance won't cover the lawsuits. The potential liability is estimated at $30 to $50 million. That's not my fault, Vincent said desperately. I was protecting the company's reputation. You were protecting yourself, Marcus said, his voice still calm but with an edge now. And in doing so, you violated about 20 different policies, not to mention potentially several laws. Patricia, continue. Patricia flipped through her documents. Additionally, Mr. Hastings has been misappropriating company resources for personal use. The business trips to Monaco, Paris, and Dubai over the past year were actually personal vacations with Rachel Chen at that time, still married to another employee. The private jet usage that Mr. Hastings claimed was for client development was actually chartered for these personal trips. The penthouse apartment Mr. Hastings occupies is leased by the company as executive housing, but per the lease agreement should not be used for personal relationships. Cell phone records show Mr. Hastings conducting personal business during company time, including day trading that lost approximately $200,000, losses he attempted to write off as business expenses. Each revelation hit Vincent like a physical blow. Marcus watched dispassionately as the man who'd seemed so powerful, so untouchable just days ago, literally shrank in his chair. The board has reviewed all evidence, Margaret Rothstein said. Mr. Hastings, you are terminated for cause, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. You have 1 hour to collect personal effects from your office under supervision. All company property, including your laptop, phone, access cards, and company credit cards, must be surrendered. The company will pursue full legal remedies for the funds you've misappropriated. You can't do this, Vincent said, but there was no conviction in his voice anymore. I built this company. You ran this company, Marcus corrected. My father built it, and while you ran it, you did genuinely good work for about 10 years. The last 5 years, though, you got lazy, entitled, started believing your own press releases, started thinking you actually owned what my father had merely let you borrow. Vincent's eyes met Marcus's, and there was something broken there now. Rachel. Does Rachel know? Not yet, Marcus said, but she will. I imagine right around the time she realizes that the penthouse apartment has been reclaimed by the company, that the private jet access she was so excited about doesn't exist anymore, that the man she thought was worth $700 million is actually worth approximately $8 million, and most of that is tied up in assets he's about to lose in lawsuits. "You're doing this because of Rachel," Vincent said desperately. "Because she chose me over you. I'm doing this because you're a liability to this company and its employees," Marcus interrupted. "Rachel's poor judgment is her problem. Your poor judgment is mine to fix. The two things just happen to intersect." Security appeared at the door. Vincent stood slowly, his expensive suit somehow looking cheaper now, his confident posture completely gone. As he walked toward the door, he paused beside Marcus. "She really doesn't know?" Vincent asked quietly. "About the money? The company?" "She knows what you told her," Marcus replied, which apparently was mostly lies. Vincent laughed a bitter sound. "Well, I guess we deserve each other then." As security escorted Vincent from the boardroom, Marcus felt something unexpected, not triumph, not satisfaction, just a kind of hollow sadness. This man had been his mentor once, had taught Marcus most of what he knew about commercial real estate, had seemed to genuinely care about developing young talent. When had that changed? When had Vincent become the kind of person who'd abuse his power, betray his protege, destroy his own career for short-term gratification? "Marcus?" Margaret Rothstein's voice brought him back to the present. "Are you ready to discuss next steps?" Marcus turned to face the board, to face his future. "Yes. Let's begin." The meeting lasted 3 more hours, covering everything from immediate operational changes to long-term strategic planning. Marcus was appointed interim CEO, with a permanent decision to be made within 6 months. The board committed to full transparency with employees, to addressing the toxic culture Vincent had created, to rebuilding trust both internally and externally. It was exhausting, overwhelming, and exactly what Marcus had been training for his entire career, without knowing it. When the meeting finally ended, Robert pulled Marcus aside. "Your father would be proud. You handled that perfectly." "Did I?" Marcus looked out at the city, at the empire his father had built and protected. "I just destroyed a man's career and exposed my wife's affair to the entire company. That doesn't feel like something to be proud of." "You held a predator accountable," Robert corrected gently. "Vincent made his choices. Rachel made hers. You just refused to be their victim. That takes strength." Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We need to talk." Rachel, she knew. Somehow she already knew. Probably Vincent had called her, or maybe someone from the office had reached out. It didn't matter. The consequences were coming for everyone now. "What will you say to her?" Robert asked, reading over Marcus's shoulder. Marcus thought about his wife, his soon-to-be ex-wife, about the life they'd built and the way she'd destroyed it for a Bax's fantasy that was already crumbling. He thought about the Marcus she'd married, the struggling MBA student who'd seemed safe and stable and boring. He thought about the Marcus she'd left, the vice president she saw as predictable and limited. And he thought about the Marcus he actually was, the heir to a $700 million empire who just fired the man she'd betrayed him for. "I'll say goodbye," Marcus said finally. She made her choice. Now she gets to live with it. The restaurant Rachel had chosen for their meeting was expensive and public, a steakhouse in downtown Seattle, where they'd celebrated their 2nd anniversary, where Marcus had proposed to her 3 years ago. She'd picked it deliberately, Marcus knew, as a reminder of what they'd had, what she was throwing away. What she didn't understand yet was that everything was already gone. Marcus arrived exactly on time, found Rachel already seated at a corner booth, her red dress from Tuesday night replaced with something more demure, her confident smile from the promotion party nowhere in evidence. She looked nervous, maybe even scared, and Marcus felt that same hollow sadness he'd experienced watching Vincent leave the boardroom. "Thank you for coming," Rachel said as Marcus slid into the booth across from her. "I wasn't sure you would. You said we needed to talk." Marcus kept his voice neutral, careful. Whatever happened next, he wanted to handle it with dignity. Rachel's hands twisted around her water glass. Is it true, what Vincent told me this morning? About your father? About the company? Depends on what Vincent told you. He said Thomas Chen owned Hastings and Associates. That you inherited everything. That Vincent was just an employee who got fired this morning. Her eyes searched Marcus's face. He said you've been the actual owner since Tuesday morning. That you knew everything when we... Yes, Marcus said simply. It's all true. Rachel's face crumbled. Why? Didn't you tell me? About your father? About the money? We were married, Marcus. 5 years, and you never thought to mention that your family owned $700 million? Marcus signaled the waiter. Ordered a whiskey neat, something he rarely drank but suddenly needed. I didn't know until my parents died. My father structured everything to stay hidden. He wanted me to build a life based on who I was, not what I had. He wanted me to find people who loved me for me, not for money they thought I might inherit someday. That's not fair, Rachel protested. I did love you. I do love you. Vincent was a mistake, a stupid mistake, but it doesn't erase what we had. You left me, Rachel. Marcus's voice stayed calm, but he felt anger rising beneath the surface. You didn't just leave me quietly or ask for a divorce in private. You announced your affair in front of 200 people. You humiliated me at my own promotion party. You laughed while you did it. You stood there with Vincent and told everyone I was boring and predictable and could never give you the life you wanted. Tears were streaming down Rachel's face now. I know, and I'm sorry. I was caught up in the excitement, in what Vincent was promising, in this fantasy of a different life. But Marcus, we can fix this. We can work through it. We've been together 7 years. That has to count for something. It did count for something, Marcus said quietly. It counted until you decided it didn't. The waiter brought Marcus's whiskey. He took a sip, let the burn settle in his chest. Rachel watched him with desperate eyes, and Marcus wondered what she saw. Did she see the boring husband she'd left? Did she see the wealthy owner she wished she'd appreciated? Or did she see a stranger, someone who'd existed all along but she'd never bothered to actually know? Vincent said you fired him, Rachel said, her voice small. He said there were lawsuits and investigations and that he's going to lose everything. Vincent violated company policy in about 20 different ways, Marcus replied. He harassed employees, misappropriated company funds, created massive legal liability. I didn't fire him because of you, Rachel. I fired him because he was a danger to the company and its employees. But the timing, right after Tuesday night, the investigation started before Tuesday night. My father's lawyers had been looking into Vincent's behavior for months. They just didn't tell me until after I inherited. Marcus finished his whiskey, felt the warmth spread through his body. Vincent got fired because Vincent deserved to be fired. What happened between you two just made the decision easier. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, tears still sliding down her cheeks. What about us? Can we at least try to save our marriage? I'll call off the divorce. We can go to counseling. We can... No, Marcus said it gently but firmly. Rachel, you told 200 people that you hadn't loved me in years, that I was boring and predictable, that Vincent was everything I could never be. You stood there with his hand on your back and laughed while you destroyed our marriage. You don't get to take that back just because Vincent turned out to be different than you thought. But I didn't know. Exactly, Marcus interrupted. You didn't know. You didn't know that I'd inherited anything. You didn't know that Vincent was broke and leveraged and about to lose everything. You made your decision based on what you thought was true, that Vincent had money and power and I didn't. The only thing that's changed is you found out you were wrong. That's not love, Rachel. That's just regret about a bad investment. Rachel flinched like he'd slapped her. That's not fair. I made a mistake, yes, but I'm trying to fix it. You can't fix it, Marcus said, his voice still gentle but absolutely certain. Rachel, if Vincent really was rich and powerful, would you be here? Right now? If he still had the CEO position in the penthouse and the private jets, would you be asking to save our marriage? Or would you be planning your wedding? Rachel's silence was answer enough. Marcus pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, slid it across the table. My lawyer drew up a settlement offer. It's generous more than you're entitled to legally, but I don't want to drag this out. You'll get $2 million as a one-time payment. You keep your car and any personal possessions, and we divide the house 50-50. In exchange, you sign a non-disclosure agreement about my family's business interests, and you don't contest the divorce. Rachel's hands shook as she opened the envelope, scanned the documents. $2 million? It's more than fair for a 5-year marriage where you were unfaithful, Marcus said. Take it or don't. But if you contest this, if you try to fight for more, my lawyers will make the case that your affair constitutes abandonment under state law. You'll get less, and it will be public and ugly. This way, you walk away with enough money to start over somewhere. Build a life that makes you happy. I don't want the money, Rachel said, but her eyes stayed fixed on the settlement number. I want my husband. I want our life back. You gave that up Tuesday night. Marcus stood, dropped cash on the table for his whiskey. Goodbye, Rachel. I hope you find what you're looking for. He walked out of the restaurant into the Seattle rain, feeling lighter somehow, like he'd set down a weight he'd been carrying for years without realizing it. His phone buzzed Jennifer from the office, checking in, asking if he needed anything. Marcus smiled. Real friends, real colleagues, people who'd stood by him when everything fell apart. Those relationships would matter going forward. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of 14-hour days, rebuilding Hastings and Associates. Marcus hired an interim COO, a woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez, who'd run a competing firm for 15 years and brought both expertise and integrity. He commissioned a full cultural audit, fired 3 more executives who'd enabled Vincent's behavior, and implemented new policies around harassment and discrimination. He met with every department, listened to employee concerns, and started rebuilding trust brick by brick. Rachel signed the settlement agreement without changes, took her $2 million, and moved to Portland. Marcus heard through mutual friends that she'd started dating a tech entrepreneur, was working at a boutique marketing agency, seemed to be building the life she'd wanted. He felt nothing about it, not anger, not satisfaction, just a distant hope that she'd eventually find contentment. Vincent wasn't so fortunate. 3 more women came forward with harassment claims, the lawsuits mushroomed, and Vincent's assets were frozen pending litigation. The man who'd seemed so powerful, so untouchable, was living in a modest apartment and working as a consultant for a fraction of his former salary. Marcus felt no satisfaction in that, either just sadness for the talent wasted, the potential squandered, the harm caused to women whose careers had been damaged. On a Friday evening, 6 weeks after the disastrous promotion party, Marcus stood in his father's study, now his study in the family home he'd inherited. The modest suburban house where Thomas and Margaret Chen had raised their only son, where they'd hidden a $700 million fortune behind worn furniture and home-cooked meals, and a life dedicated to family rather than display. Marcus understood now why his father had lived this way, why Thomas had built an empire but never flaunted it, why he'd insisted Marcus work for everything rather than inheriting privilege from birth. Power and money didn't make someone better or more worthy. They were just tools, and like any tools, they revealed character based on how they were used. Vincent had used his borrowed power to abuse employees and inflate his ego. Rachel had chased the fantasy of wealth without caring about the person behind it. And Marcus had the chance now to use his inheritance to build something better, to protect employees, to create opportunities, to honor his parents' legacy through actions rather than displays. His phone buzzed. An email from Jennifer. Drinks tonight? Team wants to celebrate the Martinez hire. Marcus smiled, texted back. Absolutely. Where and when? Life was moving forward. The company was healing. And Marcus Chen, who'd been humiliated at his own promotion party 6 weeks ago, who'd watched his wife laugh while she left him for his boss, who'd stood in a room full of colleagues' pity, and hidden his own power. Marcus Chen was finally becoming the man his father had always believed he could be. Not because of money, not because of revenge, but because when life had tested him, when betrayal and humiliation could not won and have broken him, Marcus had chosen dignity over drama, justice over vengeance, and the long game over short-term satisfaction. And in the end, that choice had made all the difference.